The notice was plastered to my front door with so much duct tape, it looked like someone was trying to seal off a crime scene. $500 fine, excessive noise violation. Thursday, 3:17 a.m. The words were printed in angry red letters that practically shouted off the page. I stood there in my driveway, suitcase still in hand, car keys dangling from my fingers, wondering if jet lag had scrambled my brain. Thursday at 3:17 in the morning? At that exact time, I'd been 30,000 feet above Kansas, wedged into C-12C on a red-eye from Seattle, halfway home from a cybersecurity conference. I still had the boarding pass tucked into my pocket, my conference badge in my laptop bag, and about 50 unread emails from the event as evidence. There was only one explanation. Margaret Whitmore had finally lost her mind. Margaret was our HOA president, a title she wielded like a crown. Since the day I moved into Maple Ridge Estates 8 months ago, she'd stalked me like a hawk circling roadkill. Apparently, a 42-year-old divorce software engineer didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Margaret was 63, with helmet-stiff gray hair that could probably deflect small-caliber rounds, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She measured fence heights with a laser level and once fined the Johnsons because their daughter's chalk drawings weren't approved outdoor art. She'd even forced through a bizarre, odd-number flowers rule during a late-night board meeting, because symmetry is authoritarian, whatever that meant. Before seizing control of the HOA, Margaret had been a mid-level bank manager until a string of harassment complaints quietly ended her career. Now, she'd turned that same hunger for control in the neighborhood, transforming a volunteer position into what she treated as a full-time executive post. She even printed business cards. Margaret Whitmore, President and Chief Compliance Officer. Her garage had become HOA headquarters, complete with filing cabinets, a printer, and a whiteboard tracking every resident's infractions in color-coded markers. Her particular vendetta, though, was against what she called unattached males. According to her, we lowered the family-friendly atmosphere, attracted unsavory elements, and probably ran secret gambling rings in our basements. My own basement held a treadmill and boxes of old tax returns, but try explaining that to Margaret. I went inside, dropped my bag, and immediately started gathering proof. My flight had departed Seattle at 11:45 p.m. Wednesday and landed at 6:20 a.m. Thursday. At 3:17 a.m., the time of the alleged violation, I'd been watching a flight attendant demonstrate how to buckle a seatbelt I'd already fastened 1,000 times. This wasn't about noise. It was about harassment. Margaret had been escalating for months. Last month, she tried to enforce a dress code for mail retrieval because men in basketball shorts, she claimed, were detrimental to children's development. Before that, she proposed a curfew for single adults and suggested higher HOA fees for unmarried residents, arguing we use more community resources, though she never could explain which ones. I pulled up my smart doorbell footage. Wednesday night was uneventful. No visitors, no lights, no motion triggers between 6 p.m. when my neighbor collected my mail and 7 a.m. when the newspaper hit the driveway. Then I saw it. At 3:05 a.m. Thursday, my front camera caught Margaret herself creeping across my lawn, something clutched in her hand. She lingered by my living room window for about 4 minutes before retreating. At 3:15, a sudden blast of heavy metal erupted, clearly from outside the house. I enhanced the footage. Margaret was carrying a large portable speaker, one of those waterproof party models. She placed it right against my window, blasted the music for exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds, then scurried back toward her house. The kicker? At one point, she looked directly into my camera, completely unaware it had night vision. Her face was perfectly clear in the footage. Every wrinkle, every ounce of smug satisfaction illuminated in night vision. She was wearing that same navy blazer she wore to every HOA meeting, complete with a gold-embroidered president title she'd bought using association funds. It was as if she considered herself on official duty at 3 in the morning. I copied all the footage to a flash drive and drove straight to the police station. Officer James Bradley reviewed it with a raised eyebrow. Well, he said finally, "You definitely weren't home." and this is some pretty concerning behavior. He agreed to come with me to confront her. When Margaret opened the door, she was, predictably, still in uniform. The HOA blazer, the polished nameplate, the same plastic smile she used to sell bad news as community improvement. That smile faltered the instant she saw Officer Bradley standing beside me. "Good morning, officer," she began, her tone sugary and false. "Is there a problem?" "I assume this is about maintaining neighborhood standards. We've had issues with noise. It's my duty to protect property values, you understand." Her voice had that condescending lilt she used whenever explaining why someone's grass was 2 inches too tall. Officer Bradley asked to see her documentation, the supposed multiple complaints she claimed to have received about my property. Margaret's face flushed several shades of pink. "Oh, well, the complaints were verbal," she stammered. "I didn't have time to document them. It was very distressing." I plugged in a flash drive and showed the footage. Margaret creeping across my lawn at 3:05 a.m., speaker in hand. The color drained from her face. She opened and closed her mouth a few times before landing on, "I was investigating suspicious activity." Officer Bradley raised an eyebrow. "At 3 in the morning? Before the alleged noise violation?" She froze. I played the audio, heavy metal blaring from outside my house. Margaret's hands began to tremble. "Someone must have been in your yard," she blurted. "My cameras didn't catch anyone," I replied, front or back. Her eyes darted nervously. "Then you must have tampered with them." Officer Bradley cut in. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you own any portable speakers?" She hesitated. "No. Well, yes, for emergencies. But it was stolen last week. Did you file a report?" "I didn't have time," she said, her voice cracking. "Too busy with HOA business." Then she made her fatal mistake. She sniffed, straightened her blazer, and said, "Even if Mr. Miller wasn't home, he's still responsible for his property, and whoever he lets visit while he's away." I frowned. "How did you know I wasn't home?" Margaret froze. "Well, your car was in the driveway. I assumed. You also mentioned I was at a conference." I said quietly, "How did you know that?" Her face went from pink to purple. "I overheard it somewhere. Or maybe someone told me. I don't remember. Must have been at the grocery store." Officer Bradley's tone hardened. "You seem to know a lot about your residents' personal business, Mrs. Whitmore." Her composure shattered. "Do you know what kind of people move in here these days?" she snapped. "Single men, working odd hours, lowering the tone of the neighborhood. Someone has to maintain order." I recorded everything. Every word of her meltdown, including her admission that she'd been monitoring my travel schedule through a friend who worked at the airline. By the time Officer Bradley finished his report, Margaret's voice had dwindled to a faint, indignant hiss. He told her she'd likely face charges for filing a false report and harassment. I spent the next 3 days talking to neighbors. Once word spread, the floodgates opened. David Park, a reservist, had been fined for a broken window while deployed overseas. The Andersons received citations for vehicles they didn't even own. Jennifer Santos, another single homeowner, was cited for inappropriate curtains, which, ironically, were identical to Margaret's. But the worst story came from Robert and Susan Phillips, an elderly couple who'd lived here for 20 years. Margaret fined them $800 for unsightly medical equipment on their porch, Robert's wheelchair ramp. When they tried to explain, she told them, illness is an excuse for poor aesthetics. Then she suggested they move to assisted living if they couldn't maintain property standards. Susan cried as she told me they'd paid the fine out of their fixed income, terrified Margaret might somehow take their home. And then there was Marcus Thompson, an EMT and Army veteran who worked nights. Margaret had fined him repeatedly for parking in his own driveway during the day, claiming it violated the spirit of residential parking rules because most people are at work. She even tried to pass a rule requiring all vehicles to be gone between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. Margaret's latest rule would have made it impossible for anyone who worked nights or from home to live in peace. That was the final straw. 14 of us banded together and hired an attorney named William Hayworth, a sharp, unflappable man who specialized in HOA law. When he reviewed our evidence, he actually laughed. "She's violated at least 6 state statutes and multiple federal fair housing laws," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't an HOA, it's a fiefdom." We scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Tuesday night. Margaret responded with a newsletter warning about troublemakers trying to destroy our community values. But by then, everyone knew the truth. The community center was overflowing. Neighbors filled every chair and lined the walls. Margaret sat at the head table, gripping her gavel like a weapon, her nameplate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She opened with a speech about the heavy burden of leadership, about sacrifice, and ungrateful residents who didn't appreciate the work it takes to preserve excellence. Then William stood. Calm, precise, devastating. He laid out the evidence. 23 false complaints in 18 months. A pattern of discrimination targeting unmarried residents. Over $16,000 in unaccounted fines. The room erupted. Voices shouted. People demanded to know where their money had gone. Someone yelled that Margaret's nephew had been paid $40,000 for pool maintenance, on a pool that didn't exist. Another neighbor pointed out that HOA funds had been used to buy plants now sitting neatly in Margaret's personal garden. Margaret slammed her gavel, so hard it snapped in half. "You're all in violation," she shrieked. "This is a hostile meeting. I can find every one of you." That's when I stood up. I played the recording of her meltdown, the part where she admitted to stalking my travel schedule, and a rant about single men ruining the neighborhood. The board called for an immediate vote to remove her. Margaret screamed that the vote was illegal. William calmly pointed out that the bylaws allowed emergency removal for criminal conduct. The final tally, 58-2. Only Margaret and her loyal sidekick, Eleanor, voted in her favor. Margaret tried to save face by claiming she was resigning anyway, but the board insisted on a formal removal. Within weeks, the district attorney filed 18 counts of filing false reports, each carrying potential jail time and fines. Our group's civil lawsuit, 14 families strong, sought $400,000 in damages. Then came the state investigation. Margaret had embezzled $43,000 in HOA funds over 2 years. At trial, her lawyer argued she suffered from a compulsive need for control. The prosecutor wasn't having it. He showed the jury emails where Margaret bragged to her sister about running out the undesirables and making a tidy profit doing it. Then he dropped the bombshell. Investigators had recovered a deleted digital journal from Margaret's computer. In it, she detailed her grand plan to purify Maple Ridge estates, driving out singles, renters, and anyone she deemed unworthy. She wrote that single men are perverts, single women are loose, and renters are just trailer trash with temporary money. She had cataloged every false complaint like trophies, rating them by effectiveness. My so-called noise violation earned 4 out of 5 stars with a note. Should have made it drugs instead, harder to disprove. The prosecutor also revealed that Margaret had been taking kickbacks from her nephew's fake maintenance company. Every fine she issued funneled 30% into a private account she thought was hidden. She'd pocketed over $60,000, spending on vacations, jewelry, and, ironically, mortgage payments on her own house in the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. The judge found her guilty on all counts. 3 years in prison, 18 months to serve, 5 years probation, and full restitution. The fines totaled $36,000. The civil judgment added another $220,000. But the judge wasn't finished. He issued a lifetime ban preventing her from serving on any HOA board in the state. He also sentenced her to 500 hours of community service, specifically helping single-parent households. A poetic form of accountability, he said dryly. Her real estate license was revoked by the state board the following week. When the sentence was read, Margaret stood frozen for 10 full seconds, mouth open in silent disbelief. Then she collapsed into her chair, sobbing. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," she wailed as the bailiff cuffed her wrists. Her perfectly coiffed hair fell across her face, and for the first time, she looked every bit of her 63 years. People like Margaret always think the rules protect them. until the rules finally catch up.